Fiesta rear pad and disc change on our Fiesta mk8 ST, or for those of you who live anywhere in the world except for the UK, on this 2018 plus Fiesta Mk7 ST. No, I don't know either. As we're working on the rear brakes, chock a front wheel and make sure that the handbrake is fully released. And while we're on the subject of is it a Mark 7 or a Mark 8, depending on where you live in the world, because most of the world regard this as being a Mark 7 still. It's only in the UK it's called a Mark 8. That leads to a top tip, which is to make sure when changing these brakes that you get the correct parts, because at 2018 there was a change, and so you need to know about that change point and make sure you know which side of that change point your car is on. I'll link to the Padgett and Techstar brake books so that you can look in there for your car. And a supplementary top tip to help you with that: if your car is close to this change point and you're not entirely sure whether it's a before or after, if you measure from the face of the disc to the wheel mounting face, that distance there, within the Padgett and Techstar brake book it shows a dimension diagram of the discs, and you can see what that dimension is for the two variants, and you can compare yours to see which variant it is. Anyway, enough of my prevaricating about the bush. Let's get on with actually changing these pads and discs. First, remove this spring from the caliper. Pull out the top leg and then the bottom leg and it'll come away. Where the flexi is screwed to a bracket just behind the disc here, release it from the bracket with an 8mm socket. Next, remove both dust caps from the slide pin rubbers and undo the slide pins with a 7mm hex. Once the slide pins are undone, push them back into their rubbers a little bit just to clear them away from the holes. And at this point the caliper is now free to lift away from the disc. However, if, as like I have on this disc, you've got a little bit of a lip on both sides, you might find it very difficult to pull the caliper away because the pads will trap on that lip, and you can't just put a lever in and push the piston back in, because the pistons on rear brakes need to be screwed back in. So the way I did it on the other side was with a good lever the brake caliper away using the caliper bracket at the top and the bottom. And what you'll find is if you do the top and then do the bottom, it'll just rock like that. Pull one end away a little and then stick something in that'll stop it from going back into place. I'm using a little cold chisel. Then go to the other end with your lever. It might be quite tough because you're trying to get these brake pads over this lip. Work it from each end a bit at a time until the caliper comes free of the disc. Note that the pad that's on the inside has got the spring. We'll come back to the caliper in a few moments. Now, with a 13mm socket from behind the disc, undo the two screws that hold the caliper carrier into place and lift the caliper carrier away from the disc. Now, Ford don't use a screw in the discs to hold the disc to the hub, so the disc should now be free to come away from the hub. However, top tip, on the other side I found that the disc was corroded to the hub face and it was very, very tight around this join here. So I had to use a lump hammer, hit it from behind, turn it a bit, hit it from behind, turn it a bit, hit it from behind, and so on, and just keep doing that until it comes free and it comes away. Top tip here, don't let the caliper hang with its weight being supported purely by the flexible hose. You could damage the hose. I actually find that once you've got the disc off, the hub is actually a good place to rest it. So now we're going to look at winding the piston back in. Find the bleed nipple and remove the dust cap. Now, if the dust cap is missing, replace it with a 10mm socket or ring spanner. Make sure that you can undo the bleed nipple. Leave your 10mm spanner on the bleed nipple and attach a bleed hose to the top of the nipple with the other end in a jar. Put a hose clamp on the flexible hose. At this point, if you're using a kit, you will need your right hand threaded wind back tool, and I don't know whether there's any universal code to the markings on the adapters, but I'm using adapter F. So position your adapter so that it engaged with the piston, pull back the bearing plate, and by hand wind back the big nut, I suppose you could call it, until it's tight. Now, you will need a wind back tool for this. On the other side, I attempted to wind the piston back in without pushing it at the same time, because it just so happens that the prongs on the tool fitted into the piston, but that doesn't work. The piston just span and it didn't wind back in. so you do need the function of pushing it at the same time as winding it. So you can either use a kit or you can get a car specific tool. To be honest, I think you'd be better off getting a kit, because then you've got that for life and it'll probably cover most of the cars you're ever likely to own. Now make sure that the end of your bleed tube is in your jar, and open your bleed nipple about half a turn, and holding the main body of your wind back tool with an appropriate size spanner, wind the piston back in all the way, and you will see the excess fluid from the piston coming out of the bleed nipple and into your jar. Don't be lazy and just leave the bleed nipple shut and push the fluid back up the system. The most moisture laden and dirty fluid is always at the caliper ends of the circuit, and if you push that fluid back up the system, some of that dampness can get into the ABS block, which can cause corrosion in the long term, damaging your ABS. And make sure that the piston is pushed all the way back in, and then close your bleed nipple back down. Remove your tool by turning the body, not the handle. Remove your hose clamp, your bleed tube and your nipple spanner, but while you're removing it, do double check that you have tightened the bleed nipple down sufficiently. Pull both of the slide pins out of their rubbers, and with a wire brush in a drill or a hand wire brush, give them a thorough clean up. Make sure that they're nice and shiny. Spray them down with some brake cleaner, and with a toothbrush or a round nylon brush and some brake cleaner, clean the inside of the slide rubbers and allow those to dry. Also with brake cleaner, degrease the mounting face for the disc, allow it to dry, and then give that mounting face a thorough clean with a wire brush in a drill. That's very important, because this face needs to be clean and flat. We don't want any rust particles or dirt on that face that could cause the disc to be out of true. Then with a little Ceratec or other suitable non-metallic brake grease, there are plenty available. Ceratec is just my choice. Apply a smear all around this face. Just a smear, mind, don't need any excess. That will help to prevent future corrosion between the face of the hub and the inside face of the disc. Also lubricate with your Ceratec around the wheel flange. Give the carrier bracket a wash down with brake cleaner to get rid of the dust, and then clean with a brush, either by hand or with the brush in the drill, the running surfaces where the pads go, and do the same with the inside surfaces of the caliper, although they're not so critical. The pads don't actually run on the caliper there. Put a small smear of Ceratec on the running surfaces. Do that before you put the caliper carrier back, because then you don't risk getting this grease onto the disc. Apply some Ceratec inside the slide pin runners and a little to the slide pins themselves, and then push the slide pins back into position. Make sure that the slide pins can be pushed backwards and forwards freely. Now get your new disc, but either wear clean gloves or wash your hands, and hold the disc by the middle and outer edges only. Check the instructions for the discs that you've got. Some discs come with an oil coating, which is there to prevent corrosion during storage and transport, and you might have to clean that off with brake fluid. These Textar discs, and the same with Pagid and Mintex, are corrosion protection coated with Geomec, and they come ready to fit, no need to wash down. The Geomec coating, as well as the quality of these discs and the friction material, are the main reasons why I like this maker discs. I typically use Pagid, but Pagid don't actually do discs for the ST. Mintex, Pagid and Textar, by the way, are all from TMD Friction. They're all from the same company, and they're just different tiers of brand names for different market positions. With the disc in position loosely at this stage, put the carrier bracket back on the hub, tighten up the screws, but I'll flash the torque up onto the screen when I've found it out. Lubricate the reverse side of the pads with some Ceratec and position them in the carrier against the disc, remembering that the pad with no spring goes on the outside and the pad with the spring goes on the inside. When you hold the disc flat against the hub face, the pads should sit flat against the disc but without overlapping the edge. If you've got some washers that'll fit over here, M12 I think, you could put a little stack of washers on and put one of your wheel nuts on, perhaps on two of the studs to hold the discs in place whilst you're doing this. Push the slide pins back into their rubbers so that there's just a little bit of thread poking out, maybe 2 or 3 turns, and position the caliper over the pads. Push the top pin into position and get the thread started off into its hole, at least 3 or 4 turns, and then you'll have to push down on the bottom of the caliper to get the bottom pin in place, because of course you're pushing against that spring that's on the rear pad. Screw the pin all the way in and do up tight. I'll flash the torque onto the screen. Don't forget to do the top one as well, of course. and replace the 2 caps into the slide pin rubbers. Another top tip, before you put this spring back into place on the caliper, where the ends of the spring fit into the holes in the caliper, squeeze a little bit of your brake grease into those holes. The reason for that is that this spring is steel, and most brake calipers are made of an alloy casting, and over the years you get galvanic corrosion between the steel spring and the alloy caliper, and eventually what you'll find, you'll come to change these pads and you won't be able to get these spring legs out of those holes because they'll have corroded in. This little trick just helps to stop that from happening. The clip goes on in this orientation. Put this bend here against that top surface and slip that leg into place. Slip the bottom leg into place in the hole, and then push the bottom of the spring behind the carrier and make sure that they're pushed fully home. Put a splodge of grease over to help close up the hole and keep dirt and water out. And of course, don't forget to reattach the flexible hose bracket just behind the disc here. Now, when you get to this point, do not be tempted to pull on the handbrake before you've pumped the brake pedal, push the piston out to meet the pad, clamp everything together. And this is what I like to do. Get both sides to this stage where the new stuff is all assembled but not yet clamped up. We've got rid of the old fluid out of the piston, so the chances are the fluid level is a little down in the master cylinder. So let's adjourn to under bonnet, where first of all I like to give the master cylinder a clean down with a suitable cloth. You could use a little brake cleaner as well if you like, just to get the dust and dirt off. Now I like to take the lid off, and you can see that the fluid is a little down, and neither is it perfectly clean and clear, although it's not too bad. Put a suitable cloth underneath the master cylinder to catch any dribbles, because you don't want them ruining your paintwork. And then using a turkey baster, I like to remove a bit more of the brake fluid into my bleed jar and top up the master cylinder with fresh clean fluid to about the max mark. Loosely return the cap to position just to keep out any dust and dirt, and pump the brake pedal a few times to bed the pads and discs together. Have one final check round just to make sure you've not forgotten anything or left anything off, and then you can put your wheels back on and drop your car to the ground. If you got value from this video, please support it by liking and commenting below, and I shall see you next time.